Hello everyone, it's Eric with a new rap battle ranking. Today we are covering a series that's been around for quite some time, Gridline Rap Battles. On the channel Gridline Studios, primarily run by Mr. Tibbs, Gridline runs an excellent rap battle series, specializing in live-action battles that capture the vibe of ERB better than any other series I know. Watching the behind-the-scenes for all of the battles, that have BTS videos anyway, also gave some additional insight as to how Tibbs and the crew work to make sure each aspect is as polished and memorable as possible, with creative videos, memorable jokes, and an overall accessibility that makes the battles good even when I don't know the characters. Gridline is a very fun series to talk about. Before we get into the ranking, two caveats. First, I am only going to be covering seasons 2 and 3, because the season 1 battles, they all kinda have the same vibe, and my thoughts would be pretty much equal, and they'd probably all rank in the bottom spots, and there already isn't too much to talk about with the earlier season 2 ones, so we're not going to add any more onto that. And as always, it's just my opinion on the battles. I'm sure you'll find some of these placements shocking, but Gridline has a lot of great battles, and there are some good ones that might seem pretty low, weaker ones might seem high, but that doesn't mean I don't think those weaker ones are still pretty good. I'll do my best to justify every placement. Let's begin. Last place, number 23, is Willy Wonka versus Flint Lockwood. Oh boy. Right off the bat, you may be surprised that last place didn't go to one of the battles from early 2020 or before, and those that are much older seem like they're pretty amateur. Gridline hadn't found their footing yet. Sure, but this one feels pretty amateur too. This segment is going to be particularly negative, so I'll preface by saying I think Mr. Tibbs and the rest of the team are very talented. I'll try to keep this constructive, but I do strongly dislike this battle. This was the first bonus Gridline made, and when a series like Freshie Canal is a bonus, I assume it's made pretty quickly just so it can be put out and hold over fans between the larger projects. That's all well and good, and some bonuses are excellent. My favorites include Little Mac vs. Big Mac and Monopoly vs. Pringles. The bonuses can be very fun and feel like they had a lot of effort put into them. Willy Wonka vs. Flint Lockwood is not an example of that. I'll start with the positives. Zossam as Wonka is solid. He had previously done well on the role for Freshie Canal, so it makes sense he'd be cast, and he's still pretty solid here. I also enjoyed the concept of referencing that tunnel scene from Willy Wonka, and that's about it for fun ideas in the writing. Everything else about this battle, it just doesn't work for me. I'm not a fan of the beat. It worked well in Spinell vs. Bendy because that battle had a more old-timey vibe to it, and the beat was mixed in a way that made the more intense parts stand out. Here, it kinda fits Willy Wonka because of that whimsy factor, but it's also a bit too low-key and makes his verses sound very dull, and for Flint, it just does not fit. I don't like Flint Lockwood rapping over what sounds like a music box playing Pop Goes the Weasel. The other thing that doesn't fit for Flint is the voice. Snakebite126 is an excellent rapper in VA, but he doesn't really sound like Bill Hader. This would be more forgivable if I didn't think Tibbs could probably pull off a much better impression. Maybe I'm crazy, but either way, the voice is not great. Now for the writing. It all just feels so rushed. At best, the lines feel like they would come from somebody's first battle, and at worst, they're really cringeworthy and make me especially frustrated while watching. I could go through every line, but we have a few other battles to get to, so let's have some fun. I got a random number generator to give me 5 lines to break down. First up, you got candy wraps, Reese's Pieces, I drop hot dogs, you're still the bigger weenie. The ERB reference is not good. It's one of the worst lines from the original battle, and the only new context here is that Willy Wonka makes candy. That is not enough to justify its inclusion. The other part has a very different amount of syllables that makes it sound completely disconnected from the first part, and the payoff is calling Wonka a weenie because it's associated with hot dogs. That's a very lame pun, and there are much more clever food insults they could have done if they really wanted to have that. An ERB reference and a weak pun, not a great start. Next up is, but no, it's fine that your machine works harder than you ever did. Not the worst one, but the wording is odd because it seems like Wonka is saying the fact that the machine works harder is fine, so it's not really a diss in this context. And also, Flint Lockwood is a hard worker. The movie never establishes he's lazy. It's just that many of his inventions don't work out. So it's inaccurate, has no clever wordplay, and is a little odd. Now for Writing, check. Rhyming, check. Flowing, check. Dissing, check. I get the reference here. And this is not a terrible one to be analyzing. But it is just Flint naming things the battle barely has, while the original listing of things had more variety, and I wish there was more creativity in this battle's version of the concept. And the follow-up dissing Willy Wonka's style when he is the coolest suit, and the fact that it's a pretty weak bar with no clever wordplay, bringing down the first part even more. Next up, tried scaring life lessons into people like a diabetic jigsaw. The generator really liked the first verse, it seems. This line bugs me because Willy Wonka jigsaw comparisons are very stupid to me, and the line itself has nothing creative outside of adding the word diabetic because, again, Wonka makes candy. Taking ideas that have been done before, that have been done poorly mind you, and doing them identically is not working for me. And finally, maybe hop on my dad's boat if you want to fish for attention. Snakebite really emphasizes the word fish, in a way that makes you think the writers thought this pun was extremely funny. Sadly, it's not for me. It's definitely the best example of a line that feels like it's from somebody's first project. It's a very basic pun, delivered as if it's the best line ever, and it's just not strong enough to warrant that. I know I've been hard on this one, but I don't enjoy watching it, and it all just feels so thrown together where most other grid lines feel like there's a lot more passion behind them. Number 22, The Punisher vs. Al Capone. I have little to say about the oldest battles in the list, because they just feel like some younger YouTubers with limited resources having fun making simple fan-made ERBs. This happens to be the least interesting of those, and as a result it ranks the lowest. In order to give any thoughts on this one, I do have to be watching the battle as I make the script, because it all does kinda come and go for me. I did watch the behind the scenes, and I found it interesting how Tibbs discussed the makeup he got for the battle, as well as seeing certain visuals being coordinated. It's clear they put a lot of effort into this one, and it was not made to be compared to battles made 3, 4, 5 years later. It does unfortunately rank low as a result, but I'll talk about some in-battle aspects that make this happen. I don't know anything about the Punisher, so most lines do go over my head. I remember disliking the pun, "take it for granted," because it's a dad joke I've heard a lot and I don't find very funny. I do like how there are some extras getting shot, because as I mentioned it took some coordination, and it was fun to see that in the behind the scenes. I think the Punisher voice is pretty cool, the Al Capone one was a little bland, but ultimately, there's not much about this battle that makes it stand out from the other early Season 2 ones besides a cameo from Zalsum as Weird Al. I think this one represents an older era of Gridline, and it's nice for what it is, but it's clearly not up to snuff with the modern era of Gridline. Number 21, Walmart vs. Target. This is actually the first Gridline I ever saw. I'd watched a lot of Freddy Canal battles in mid-2021, and noticed the name Mr. Tibbs appear a lot. I got curious, and I checked out his channel, and this was the only matchup that appealed to me at that point, so I watched it first. I think I thought it was awesome back then, now it has some clear flaws. According to the behind the scenes, this battle was made as a fun, small project to be a bit of a bonus, not meant to be taken seriously. That's fair, but certain aspects definitely do show that, and unfortunately it does hinder the experience years later. Having lines like, dropping rhymes and prices like bombs show this was all done pretty quickly, which Tibbs did admit behind the scenes. Changing the wording to a line like that could make it seem a bit more clear, but it's obvious why they didn't do that. It was just put together quickly, no issue. Also, Amazon tells Walmart to stop hiring old people, which I guess is in character, but also yikes. The fact that Tibbs played all 3 of the rappers with a very similar hairstyle, it does make the production seem a bit more rushed and weaker than the other early ones that do all have multiple rappers. This was evidently mostly all done by Tibbs himself just for fun. The content is a bit generic, having the rappers say, "Ha, I make more money than you and you are boring." There's a few things that get more specific, but not enough to give the writing a positive pass. I understand why this battle is the way it was, but it does hinder the quality, and there's little else to break down. Number 20, The Wizard of Oz vs. P.T. Barnum. This one is actually very memorable for one reason, but it's not a good reason, and that's that the video looks worse than the others I've discussed. With the guy playing the wizard having very dark lighting and being lower quality, and Barnum having that same quality issue, it does take away a bit, because the other videos still have the same charm while being a bit more polished and complete. Tibbs acknowledged this in the BTS, and he wasn't sure what happened, and I can understand that. I've definitely had weird issues I've never understood occur when I'm working on battles. Besides that, this is another forgettable one. Writing, performances, visuals, all fine for the time, and they stand above a few older battles, but not enough to get any higher. Number 19, Davy Crockett vs. Steve Irwin, the first battle of the ones I'm ranking, and there's not a lot to report. I think the video is actually a bit more appealing than the others I've mentioned, though the 3D backgrounds are a tad basic. I wonder if Tibbs made them or if he found them online. They weren't mentioned in the BTS from what I heard, so I am curious about that. The performances are but Tibbs and Zalsam both project well, so it is better to understand than some performances. The biggest issue that the writing is mostly just similes, a very common early mistake. Overall, not too bad, but still one of the weakest. Number 18, Galactus vs. Katamari. This, along with Wonka, are the two somewhat modern grid lines I think have enough flaws that they sit among the oldest battles in quality. I feel bad because it is clear plenty of things had a lot of time and effort put into them. You have Gridline dabbling in animation, and the costume is so out there. I've heard a lot of people say the costume is really bad, but honestly, I disagree. That's the main critique that I can't really get behind. I already thought the helmet looked really fun, and while it's not the cleanest costume, it doesn't look too cheap, but still has a campiness to me that fits Galactus quite well. It was even more interesting to see how many accessories Tibbs and Zalsam had to buy to make this costume. From ski gloves to a bucket and a hacksaw, there was a lot put into that, and it's nice to see it. I think the result deserves a bit more credit. On the Katamari visual side, I think Robot Richie's animation is nice, but definitely somewhat flawed. I think their proportions don't entirely fit the prince, especially the Katamari ball that he has. And I think the lip syncing looks like it's just the mouth animation running non-stop. It's still pretty nice, but it isn't quite strong enough to elevate the project above the biggest faults. Let's get into them. One issue I have is with the editing. Tibbs mentioned how he likes Musiclide's editing style because it's not too fast-paced. I think it could have been afforded to be a bit more speedy. The Galactus side is fine, though the editing would work better if the first verse wasn't so long and boring, and I wish there was more to spice it up. For the Katamari side, assuming Musiclide also edited this, the slow pace just does not work. After seeing the triple rap battle, Ness vs. Katamari, I think that something that's more fun, colorful, dynamic, changing backgrounds and assets, along with some faster camera movements, that's ideal for a Katamari battle. There are also some moments where transitions don't hide everything as it's happening, and some assets randomly disappear. That could have been cleaned up. The beat also could have been better on the Katamari side. More instrument changes would have made it fit for that happy vibe more. And now for the biggest flaw, the writing. A lot of lines here are on par with Wonka. The first Galactus verse is just a full minute of him saying, "I am powerful and my opponents are mere fools," with no fun wordplay, and it feels like it's played straight when it could have gone more of a parody route. The only disses reference the prince's father with very little else. Maybe it was all meant to be goofy, but it just doesn't come off that way, and as a result, it's one of my least favorite verses in Gridline, especially since it culminates in a rhyme scheme that is super awkward, because every line has a different syllable count, and to match the beat hits, he has to say things like Galactus, must, feed. The prince is less bad, but he still has some subpar lines, like a Squirrel Girl joke that feels ripped from the ERB but is not as funny. You also have the phrase Solar System Mukbang, which is a no for me personally. There is some really stretched out delivery for "just like that you'll never be a real proper god," and it needed more syllables to fit into the rhythm, especially coming off the heels of some faster rap. I will say I like Katamari calling Galactus a cosmic deer, but the whole line is, "What even is this cosmic deer that's trying to perturb me?" The use of "perturb me" to rhyme with Kirby, so unnatural. And unfortunately, the Kirby line is not good enough to warrant the stretched first part of the couplet. Katamari calls Galactus a jacked Kirby, which is, a fun, alright pun, but I can't help but feel like calling him jacked is a compliment. Not to mention Galactus existed before Kirby. It would be like a rap battle against the Roadrunner, saying, "You're just Sonic with feathers." I have more lines to shout out. Perturb me is actually not the worst rhyme in the battle, as Galactus attempts to rhyme Katamari, and he does, with calamari. The actual line is rhyming calamari and heartily, which is fine, I don't mind that, but why does he say calamari at all? I doubt there's any Katamari in Marvel Comics, and it's not even really wordplay, it kinda sounds like Katamari. I think the line could've just ended at Katamari, not said like calamari, and it would've been better. Pretty dull, but I'd rather a boring unclever line than a frustrating unclever line. I know I was hard on this one, but there are things that I think are awesome and turned out solid and deserve a bit more praise, but other things are a mix of boring and frustrating, so this ranks lower than most all other modern grid lines. Number 17, Walt Disney vs. Dr. Seuss. This one stands above most other older grid lines for a few reasons. Visuals, performances are not really noteworthy. The beard for Seuss is very solid for an early grid line. I like the drawing that Thomas made, and the voice is an interesting idea even if it is a bit dull, but that's all there. I think the beat is actually very pretty, and even if the slow tempo does cause a few similar issues to Galactus vs. Katamari with being a bit slow and boring, it does have some fun instruments that fit the characters pretty well. The other note is the writing. It has weak points, like the older ones do. For example, I spit so sick, it's what turned my final page, from Seuss being a massive self-diss. However, this has my favorite individual line in any of those older grid lines, that being, "Don't cry because I beat you, smile because you fought me." It's simple, but I love the original quote, and it has a good spin on it that feels pretty creative, and I was genuinely shocked when such a great line came from this early in their phase. And that proves that they were on the rise at this point. That's all for this battle, but it has one serious strength that aids the ranking. Number 16, Link vs. King Arthur, the highest ranked of what I consider the old ones. This battle has an advantage of featuring Link, a character with many opportunities for fun references I'm going to understand. Gridline takes advantage of this, with jokes like, "Smash your head like a pot, but there's no value inside," and "Leave this hero diminished," and "Well, excuse me, Arthur." King Arthur wordplay is also pretty abundant. I like Link saying he can hold his own against a man of your Excalibur, and "Your lines couldn't be flatter if you loved that pen dragon." Though that one should not have had a hyphen, it takes away from some of the subtlety of that pun. Overall, writing is more memorable than some of the others. It's pretty enjoyable. The video is also fairly creative. You have a CGI dragon and a bunny getting blown up, and I like that sunset to British fly transition. It's a charming, fun one. Not much else to say, but more about this one holds up than some of the other older ones. Number 15, Barbie vs. Buzz Lightyear. Another bonus battle, nothing particularly frustrating like in Wonka, but it's reminiscent of the older battles because there's very little I remember from it. I think the voices are both good, and the beat, while overused, is kind of interesting and fits decently well. And Luke Reardon does great art for Buzz Lightyear. I wasn't as fond as his style for Barbie, but honestly, these elements are all unspectacular by the current standard of Gridline, and the writing is even less interesting. There's not one line that I can remember without going back to the battle as I type the script, so I'm not going to say any of them. They're not terrible, but they aren't good, and as this seems to have had very little passion put into the writing, I don't feel like giving a passionate justification. It's better production-wise than the older ones, with nothing as bad as Wonka or Galactus, but it doesn't come close to those above it. Moving on. Number 14, Han Solo vs. Neil Armstrong. This battle does have some similarities to the older ones, but it's clear that many aspects are stronger, and it's overall a more memorable and fun battle compared to the oldest few. While the video is definitely flawed due to some rather awkward editing and odd keying on the Han Solo side particularly, it has some much stronger costumes than the older ones. There's a 19-minute BTS video of Zalsam painting the blaster, and I thought that was a very fun thing to see. How much work went into that? It's great. I think Zalsam's a very talented costume and prop designer, and this was one of the first grid lines that really got to show how talented he is in that regard. There's not much on the lyrics here. I like Han telling Armstrong to climb his tower and take a giant leap for mankind, because that's a crazy suggestion. There's some fun simple puns here. You're looking for love in all the wrong places. They're the kind of thing you'd see in Link vs. King Arthur that I like. However, the writing is more serviced by a phenomenal beat. I really love the sound of this beat. I think it fits the Gridline writing style better than all the other slow ones I've talked about so far. Lots of fun instruments, it's groovy, and it fits very naturally with these characters even when you wouldn't expect it to. This one simply sounds better than the rest, and it's mixed well with the charm of the video and overall project, helping it be a very fun one to go back to. Additionally, Zalsam doing the Connect Star Wars dance for the credits is hilarious, It might actually be my favorite part of the battle. Very solid. Number 13, the Babadook versus Freddy Krueger. Alright, I know this is a very, very beloved one. A lot call it the best, and it's definitely very ambitious. Unfortunately, it strays very far from what makes a lot of Gridlines the best, and some of those unique ideas don't work that well for me. In terms of what's super good, the audio. It sounds excellent. Seeing the BTS showed that Freddy Canal saw a lot of potential in this project, and he helped make an incredible sounding beat with awesome instrumentation being added. Not to mention, a very unique performance as the Babadook. He has so many different voices going from high to low, really showing the insanity. It's a super commendable job. It sounds very unique as a battle as a whole. It's only held back by some parts being a little hard to understand, especially when he goes really fast for one line about Freddy's mother. That part kind of breaks the immersion for me. As awesome as Freddy Krueger, also a great performance. He clearly understands the character, and learning how he did a higher voice that was pitched down because that's how Freddy Krueger is, it was cool to see that. And all in all, it's a very successful audio in the ambition department. However, video and writing issues hold it back for me. I don't like most of the flows. The one exception is, "The shadow ain't tough, he better wake up ready to get scraped up, or do you need to fix your makeup?" That's so excellent, and the rest are all kind of stiff, and they all start at different points in the beat, and it makes the whole thing sound awkward, but that one part being a little out of place. That one scheme is so strong though, so it does help a little bit. But for the issues, an example is, the first 3 bars of Babadook's second verse sound a bit early in the beat to me, and it hinders them. It comes back for the next line, but the first 3 are eh. On the note of the bars, I find a few I'm not a big fan of. I think "you left me counting sheep, call you Babadook" is a silly line that feels out of place in this very atmospheric horror battle, and it's not funny enough to justify the inclusion. A lot of the lines are just pop culture references that I assume are there because Babadook is more obscure, and they wanted to add to the accessibility factor, but I wish they leaned more into things that focus on the actual rappers, especially with Freddy's writing. He talks about the Penguin, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and Santa Claus. I don't know. Babadook has much stronger lines, especially one super great couplet. He says, "He'd morph into your father, but there's too many options. Would you prefer the abuser that you had from adoption?" That's a killer diss, with perfect delivery from Freddy Canal. However, he does also have the line, "Is he facing Pennywise? No, you're more of a clown." I don't get that one. Pennywise is a clown, so I guess he's calling Freddy a clown, but also, I don't know, it just seems odd. And the delivery is a little like, "No, you're more of a clown," really emphasizing the fact that Pennywise is not a clown. I don't know. Last note, the video. This was Rabi's first live action edit, they say in the behind the scenes, and it's very creative and dynamic. I think it's a very solid edit, especially for a first time, but the whole video was held back by the keying on mainly the Freddy side. I have to assume it's the result of being a first time edit and the Krueger costume being hard to key, but he's surrounded by a very weird sparkling green outline, and it takes away from the fact that the video is so grand in a lot of ways, background changes, all that, but it looks more amateur as a result. All in all, this was a huge project, and I applaud the team for working so hard on it, but I don't love going back to it. If it's your favorite, understandable. The things that bother me are technically very small, but they do affect my view of the battle a lot. Even though there are some more than top 10 worthy aspects for me. Top 5 even. I couldn't bring myself to put it above the 12 battles I truly love, due to some things just not stacking up against the other modern gridlines, and it can't fall back on having gridline charm because it goes in a very different direction. Number 12, Waldo vs. Banksy. Now we're talking. This is gridline to me. Short but sweet, simple but effective in every way. I find the entire project comes together super well, and is a very fun watch. Just like Han Solo, there's a phenomenal beat. It's pretty low-key, but for these sneaky, secretive characters, it fits, while also being super catchy. Unlike Han Solo, this one has an excellent video to complement the audio as well. If I'm not mistaken, this was the first time Musical I'd edited for Gridline, and it's a crazy good debut. I love the backgrounds they made, especially for Waldo, and transitions like Banksy going from being painted on the walls to being real, and that crazy good rotating shot. That makes this a gorgeous one to look at. It was one of the first that showed Gridline establishing a more distinct style of video. Like many of the best Gridlines, the performances are also solid. I think the Monarchy as Banksy is very low energy, but it fits the character well enough that I don't mind. The star performance for me is Zossam as Waldo, because even though he doesn't do the British route like most battles do, it feels like Waldo to me. It's a bit of a nerdy, energetic guy, and I think it might be my favorite take on the character in a battle. Waldo has many battles, and while I love this one, I think 2 others do have stronger lyrics. Don't get me wrong, this one has my favorite writing of the ones listed so far. You have some good quips in there, like Waldo saying, "You can find me napping when you spit a diss so bland." It references how you can find him because that's his main thing, but also gives a nice little diss. It's a very low-key one, and the insult's actually pretty accurate because Banksy is also pretty low-key. And most disses about rapping quality in battles are completely unfounded. I also love the scheme at the end of Banksy's first verse, where each part has that same multi-syllable rhyme. Unfortunately, Waldo kind of tries to do the same thing with a one-syllable rhyme, and it feels like a weaker version. And I don't think calling Banksy a walking publicity stunt is especially clever. The one other thing is, unless any love they may have had for you is now in the bin is a reference, I find it a very closer. All in all, there are definitely stronger Gridlines, but I think this battle is overall excellent. It excels in some aspects and only falters slightly in the weakest areas. There just happen to be 11 others that are even better. Number 11, Blackbeard vs. Santa Claus. Another strong battle with even higher highs than Waldo, but maybe some lower lows that sink it a bit. Let's start with the highs. First off, Blackbeard's first verse is incredible. Just like the ERB Blackbeard verse. You have great rhyme schemes with shockingly good flow for any rap battle. It's hard to pick out specific examples, but the entire thing just flows so nicely, having a few solid disses in there, like they all tend to ignore the creep peeping through their doors. This verse is just as good, if not better, than the ERB's Blackbeard. I can't fault anything in that whole verse. That said, it's definitely a massive step above the rest of the battle. 2 of the verses are hard to critique because they are incredibly short. My biggest issue is that structure. The first 4 lines are one verse, then you have 12-line verses for the second and third, and the last one's another 4 lines. I much prefer having both of the first 2 verses be the 12-line, and ending on the 4, like in Waldo vs. Banksy, that kind of style, because it feels like a very abrupt ending, and it leaves me wanting more in this Blackbeard setting. On the plus side, the closer is a very strong ending that offsets it a little bit. It's a simple joke about Blackbeard with Mrs. Claus, I took your girl kind of thing, but him saying he'll getting naughty listed is funny. So all in all, the only issue with Blackbeard is that structure, and the sort of anticlimactic ending of it. The Santa side has a few more issues. There's perks. The costume is excellent. Zossam made his face red with makeup to really emulate that classic Santa look, which most Santa battles don't do, but it looks great here. Moth Mantra is also a very fun voice for Santa, giving a few great deliveries such as, "I will take the slag up the sea dog you put the virgin in Virginia." It's funny, and I like when he interjects, "Buy Coca-Cola," into the battle. That's a very funny line. There are great moments here. That said, there are some much weaker lines that bother me. I think rhyming Carolinas with Carolines, huh, is a nice idea, but comes out sorta similar to that calamari issue. Only saved by the fact that both words make sense in context. I also think Caribbean is a bit of a stretch for Caribbean, or Caribbean if you prefer. I suppose rhyming with locations is my biggest complaint. The other issue is Santa's closer spills over into the start of Blackbeard's second verse, and makes that part sound a little messy. All in all, you have an all-time great verse here, but a weird structure and some odd lines do keep it from making the top 10. Number 10, Michael Myers vs. Mike Myers. This one's very similar to Waldo vs. Banksy for me. It's simple in many regards, but comes together very nicely. I'm going to get nitpicks out of the way. First is the voice for Michael Myers. I don't think it's quite as intimidating as it's meant to be, and maybe Tibbs should have been pitched down a little bit. The other thing is that it's apparent most lines are just saying each Myers has bad movies or TV shows or whatever. Some of those definitely get repetitive. However, I don't mind too much because the project's still super well made. The best part of this might be the beat being an awesome selection for Gridline once again, but the contrast in instruments on each side being excellent, and it's something not too many battles capture quite as well as this one. You have a contrast in the video as well. I like how Michael Myers has musicalized editing style with slow, eerie camera movements, and you have great shots like that knife raising thing. You have 15 of them behind him. It's beautiful. This sort of thing is perfect for musicalized editing style. I love it. The Mike Myers side is very different. The camera doesn't move much at all, and it feels more like it would in a scene in Wayne's World, which I believe the background is based off of. I don't know a ton about Mike Myers in this material, but many fun bits are there, and they're executed nicely and still very accessible. I like that Austin Powers bit at the beginning. It's true to the characters and simple, culminating in a funny little diss about Michael having bad rapping, and it's pretty much the best way that kind of line can be executed. Then you have the one SNL guy who says "Now we dance" appearing. That works its way into the battle very naturally, with simple but funny deliveries that make the disses more memorable. Then there's my favorite line, where Mike Myers says, "Your new stuff's like Pizza Hut because it sucks," which is not only true, but also delivered in such a dopey way that it makes it feel like the greatest diss ever, in a way that works somehow. I can't quite explain it. It's a nice Wayne's World callback, and it shows how sometimes Gridline can make very simple lines stand out as great. They do this more often than pretty much any other series I know. Rhyme schemes are strong with no overlap moments like in Blackbeard, which helps the battles sound very good. Even if the content of the lyrics is not always great, Gridline works their magic and puts a very fun spin on weaker lyrical content to make a wildly entertaining battle I don't think anyone else could have pulled off. Number 9, Al Gore vs. Captain Planet. This may be only 6 spots above Barbie, but don't be fooled. It is significantly better than the other bonuses. This matches the best Freshie Canal bonuses. I'm convinced it took 5 times as long to write as the other 2. It's insanely catchy with some genuinely crazy lines. My favorite is, "Call me Florida cause I'm stealing this victory." It's a simple but wildly effective Gridline joke once again. I also love these disses like, "Someone couldn't handle an inconvenient truth," going on the thing about Al Gore blaming voting booths for the election. They are quick so they don't feel drawn out, but they're long enough that they stick with you as they're still kind of flying by. With a silly matchup like this, there's great opportunities for jokes, and they have some bizarre ones I love. Things like Teflon Don Cheadle. They have a reference that Don Cheadle is Captain Planet, but I'm very happy they do. You may notice that I've only discussed the Captain Planet side. That's because Al Gore doesn't have as many individual lines. I'd like, "Your biggest cop was the time slot next to the Flintstones," but that's one of very few. Instead, Al Gore makes himself the star of the battle by having a crazy first verse, even better than the Blackbeard one. The flow is so darn good. Just schemes like "straight ballin', peace prize callin', GOP and climate change brawlin'." They sound so groovy, especially over this very nice low-key beat that's very, very catchy. Furthermore, Adam DRB blows me away with a very solid impression and flawless deliveries, especially when he gets whispery for the "my drip stays icy, my flows stay spicy" scheme. This verse would likely top the charts if it went out for Billboard, and his second one, while short, is also very catchy and well delivered. Not much to say on the video, but with the way this battle is written, I think it's alright they made it a bonus, but it is still at a disadvantage because I can't praise the video like the others in the top 10. No other big critiques, it's just overshadowed by some bigger projects, but it's about as good as a bonus can get. Number 8, Captain Olimar vs. Nick Cage. This battle is definitely much less of a simple grid line like Waldo or Myers. It's very different in the flow and performances, and of course, the very unique story and structure going on. Let's break this one down, verse by verse. Nick Cage comes in with a very happy and silly beat with a high-pitched voice that doesn't really sound like Nick Cage. Sometimes Zalsum dips into a very good impression of Nick Cage, but definitely a kind of lower energy one. So I think in this context of the parody Nick Cage, having this overacting high-pitched voice is good, because the perfect impression would have sounded a little less fun and make his verses less memorable. The DVD background is also very fun, nostalgic, and looks great. The whole battle was edited by Tivs, and I think it's some of his best editing. I like how he coordinated the split shot with 2 Nicks back to back. The editing is definitely serviced by that great storyboard, and all the shots flow together very nicely with great continuity. Sometimes in live action battles, a motion starts with one shot, cuts to another and ends there, but they cut the first shot too late and the second one starts too early, so it looks awkward. Here, those hard cuts are seamless. And lyrically, this verse is fire. The opening scheme is, "I'm Nick Cage, flows insane, I spit crude, Ghost Rider." So fun. And it continues into the next one where he ends with Ghost Rider in the second line. It's very different from a lot of other Gridline writing, but it's excellent. And the flows here work much better than others that stray from the norm, like for example Babadook. There are also some classic Gridline jokes here. The line, "I'm stealing this battle like a chihuahua allegedly," is a hilarious simile. Similes that say, "I'm winning this battle like a blank," are often stale now. But this one adding the word allegedly to lead into another funny hammy delivery from Zawsome, it's great. And now for the best verse. Olimar drops 2 bars so literally dope that Nick Cage immediately collapses in his next verse. Tips has a deep, serious voice as he talks about smoking fat doobies and literally holds a plush roll-up, and it's hilarious. The beat goes so low-key here and picks right back up when Nick starts freaking out. Hilarious bit, and second weirdest thing in the battle. Cage's second verse is very funny, as he contemplates how he can continue after being deflected so easily, with lines like, "Maybe I should bring up Pikmin 3, but he wasn't really in Pikmin 3, and a great reference to the iconic "not the bees" joke. The hard cuts in this verse have less continuity, but that's brilliant, as it shows the insanity that Nick Cage is falling into as reality collapses around him after 2 lines from Olimar. This precedes the weirdest part of the battle, an IRS agent coming in to tell Nick Cage he's in debt. I think it's a bizarre concept, great to have it, but the joke does wear off and there aren't too many super funny moments at that point. I like Nick Cage thinking he's in speed and being corrected as the agent looks super frustrated, and the ending wink is so deadpan, it's a great way to end this fever dream. But other than that banter bit, there's not a whole lot, it's just the IRS guy saying things about Nick Cage and how to get money back. Luckily, Tibbs does fit well as an IRS agent to the point I think that's probably his actual day job. However, this verse feels very long, unlike other Gridlines, and it's not funny enough to stack up with the other parts of the battle. This could have been top 5 if it were funny the whole way through. That said, this is an excellent and very unique project. Number 7, Godzilla vs. Harry Truman. To me, this battle is the boundary between the classic and modern Gridline. It has some weaker, more unmemorable aspects like those oldest ones, but it also has stuff that aged incredibly well, and I think would not look out of place in a 2023 Gridline. Let's start with the aspects that don't hold up as well. A lot of the writing is very clunky, and even though some individual lines are very funny, others remind me of Katamari. An example is, "Kaiju not tell them when you are outmatched." That grammar is very off, and trying to make kaiju sound like can't you is a big stretch for me. Not too many lines are this confusing, but the writing leans closer to those earlier projects, and it's the weakest besides Han Solo of the ones that came out after it. Now for the great elements. This video is stellar. The idea of live-action Godzilla sounds very stupid, especially with an inflatable suit, but it works brilliantly. Most shots successfully capture that size in a way that animation probably would have failed to. Because you have these real city backgrounds, the verses look awesome, and the Truman parts are more simple, but they still have some fun transitions like the movie theater, and especially the perspective shot with him and Godzilla. One critique I have is that I wish it stayed black and white the whole time for a consistent atmosphere, and the fact these parts look better, but overall, visuals here were a turning point for Gridline in my opinion. Additionally, the performances are more memorable than the previous ones, with Freddy Canal putting on a very convincing monster voice that works well for the character, allowing for great deliveries including, "No, I'm dunking on your raps like I did to Charles Barkley," and Matt Righteous as Truman is excellent as well. His impression's honestly quite on point, especially given he's playing a much older man. I like the way Truman is written, where he talks about sipping bourbon before the battle. It doesn't even diss Godzilla, it's just a funny introduction. He also has fun deliveries of his own, things like, "Even Dewey could defeat you, there's your headline, Chicago." Speaking of Dewey, there are 2 references to that infamous Dewey defeats Truman gaffe, which might seem like one too many, but that's one of the funniest moments in US history, so I don't mind. I enjoy some of the lines that draw parallels, like calling Godzilla a threat from the Far East. It makes the battle feel like more of an actual fight between 2 characters, even when they're so different. All in all, this might not be the best of the top 10 battles, it might not be the 7th best of the top 10 battles. However, it feels like one of the most important Gridlines to me, and I get swept up in that grand scale. It came off the heels of one of the lowest ranking battles on the list, and shows massive improvements, and I can't ignore that. Number 6, Chills vs. Rod Serling. Another simple but phenomenal one. To be fair, most aspects are on par with the last few I've talked about, with just a few being a huge step up. For the things that are on par, the beat is another excellent choice. It's very grand and atmospheric, fitting the eerie feel of the battle nicely with some awesome stings going throughout. The video is also very solid. Snake by126 edits and shows big improvement from Han Solo. I love some of these scenes, like Chills on the airplane, and especially that final endless void with the door to the Twilight Zone at the very end. It looks very dynamic and fits that eeriness once again. It's a creative video. It still feels true to Gridline though, and the somewhat muted color palette of the whole battle actually works to the benefit of the atmosphere. It's not all just black and white, so I enjoy that variety of that limited color selection, and it's very stylized as a result. For the writing, there's a lot of strong moments, and they do stay true to Gridline at their best. The only thing I don't like is androids invading we inch closer every little day, because I think little day rhyming with giveaway, it's a good rhyme, but I feel like the word little seems out of place there. I would have reworked that. But now to get to the best lines, we must discuss the aspect that stands above most others. The performances. I think both Thomas and Tibbs absolutely knock it out of the park, and give maybe their best performances in the series. Thomas's Chills is about as good as you can get. Chills has a nearly irreplicable voice, but it's one many can do an okay impression of, and I think most other rap battle voice actors would have been in that okay range. Thomas is truly great, and the way he stretches syllables at the end of most lines is fun and in character, and is a good way to deliver those lines, not to mention how they feel like they were written to be this way. Look at the opening couplet. The last thing you want in your rap battle foe is a washed up writer who doesn't know how to flow. This line is very basic, with one Chills reference and otherwise a simple claim. However, the funny stretched syllables make this a much harder hitter and seeming much funnier. Even though the two lines overlap, I think that overlap is very tasteful for Chills. The same basic line overlap occurs in multiple other lines, like, for a former soldier, you failed to fire a single shot. I can't do it in one take, but yeah. And even you'll agree with sponsors, Chills need to be censored. And I love the lines as a result. Furthermore, Thomas looks a good amount like Chills, so he really was just the perfect cast. Over to Rod Serling. Tibbs is not a perfect impression. A voice like Serling's is very hard to nail. But his register, while being a bit different, he nails the mannerisms. And the voice and body acting are both perfect. He's very reserved, but commanding and charismatic. He doesn't move around a lot, but his face is expressive, and it fits well in the rap battle. From how the camera pans to showing him entering, and how he says the Twilight Zone at the very end, he's handled perfectly the whole way through. Tibbs has a powerful and chilling delivery of so many things, like, a place as vast as space and as void as your charisma, and this bot would have fooled me if this voice wasn't a dead giveaway. That should feel out of place in this sort of serious battle, because talking about bots and Chills' voice, but it fits perfectly while still getting a laugh out of me. This whole project comes together just as well as the best ones right below it, with even stronger performances to boost. It's the battle that pushed Gridline to 1,000 subscribers, and it came out in a time where Gridline was really starting to show how phenomenal their stuff could be. Number 5, Professor Oak vs. John Madden. I feel like this placement will need a lot of justification because it's not really considered a top 5 Gridline from what I understand. Let's focus on the highlights that make this one work so well. First off, visuals are some of my favorite in the series. Might be my second favorite video from Gridline. It doesn't have a floating camera the whole time like some others. Instead, it's simple but effective transitions with lots of location changes, from a Pokemon stadium to a battlefield from the Pokemon games, and an office or something. I like that style. It feels reminiscent of ERB to me, and focuses on showing more creative backgrounds and graphics instead of crazy camera stuff. Things like that battlefield I mentioned, and the fact that there was some fun yellow graphics representing football plays used at this oak, it all looks very nice. I can tell it's Tibbs editing as opposed to Music Clyde or anyone else, and I think when the production is up like this, his more simplistic editing style actually looks very, very good. Battles don't always need a crazy moving camera, and this one proves that. Then there's the costumes. I think Professor Oak translates very successfully, and it's one of my favorite Gridline costumes as a result. The makeup and hairstyling are especially good. I've heard Madden be critiqued, There's a few select shots where you can see the boundary of the fake and real skin, sure. It's mostly not a big issue though, so I think Tibbs did a very good job making himself look more like John Madden. A more common complaint though, is that Madden seems pretty pale because of some bad color correcting, but come on. I edit in PowerPoint, I don't know what color correcting is. That issue has never jumped out at me, especially compared to Freddy Krueger keying and the similar stuff, so I think the video is near flawless and very stylish. The other aspect I find very good is the writing, especially because the battle doesn't have a whole lot of those lines that only work in Gridline, but instead has very clever punches that rise above those. You have things that are still enhanced by the Gridline deliveries though. My favorite is Oak saying, "You even got kicked out the box art, must be maddening." I think that's a very funny pun to follow up a strong and blunt diss, but it's aided by Zossam having a borderline evil smile as he says it, and that makes the whole moment stick in my head, audibly and visually. Another example is, "I've got the cutting edge to chop Oak down to size." A simple joke about trees, but it works on a few levels, and it's accompanied by a very fun transition to Madden watching Oak on the screen, and it's a great start to the second verse. I find these lines to be much stronger than others I've praised, from things like Chills and the Flintstones line from Al Gore. I loved the battle when it came out. I had it on loop in a way I never really did for another battle, at least not a Gridline, when it was released. It's got all the best aspects of a Gridline, but with even better writing and visuals for my taste. It feels so much like a classic ERB in the best way. Solid production with fun visuals and excellent lines. I revisit this one more than any other I've named so far. It really comes together perfectly for me. Number 4 is Chris McLean vs. Jason Voorhees. The audio for this battle was made nearly 3 years before the video came out. I'm under the impression the audio was pretty big when it dropped, and I can see why. The audio comes together just as well as any Gridline made 2 or more years after it. You have 2 great performances, with Tibbs as Jason being a much better silent slasher voice than the Michael one, because it sounds more deep and menacing. I have limited knowledge of Total Drama, but Jakudo's voice seems very faithful from what I do know, and he nails every delivery of Chris's most iconic lines like, "Not cool, dude," and "Don't come back, ever." So you have great vocals, but does what they're saying hold up? Overall, yes. The battle flows very nicely, with simple rhymes and very few crazy schemes if any at all, but there are very fun punchlines. The incorporation of the aforementioned quotes is excellent as they are tied into Friday the 13th quite effectively. Other fun lines that feel in character for McLean include, "You're known for a series where every entry is lame," and just starting with, "Good one, Gretzky." These are very basic lines, sure, but even more so than others I've cited in battles. However, they work just as well as those better lines due to how they're written and spoken. For Jason, you have other in-character lines where he discusses his violent tendencies, like, "You have chef, but I do better work with a hatchet." He also packs in some great punches, like, "Did it ever dawn on you that's why you got replaced?" A fun, quick diss that's not lingered on too much, but just enough that it's very fun and memorable as his closer. And that's not the only great line he has. So now to talk about the aspect everybody was waiting years for. The video. This is the best video in the series, in my opinion. It's very well edited thanks to phenomenal work by Fight Marker, and it has several quick but unforgettable visual gags. Things like, the silhouette of Jason framing the shot as a callback to the poster looks unbelievably cool. And then there's small details that are the more fun, silly things that make the video more entertaining. For example, having Jason's machete come out of the water right before they cut to the outro with Jason dancing and Chris dead in the water. It's a legendary ending. This video clearly had a lot of great ideas behind it. From Chris's goofy shrug when he's asked how he's still in the air, to Jason beating a sleeping bag on the ground in reference to a kill where he did it against a tree, to a whole island collapsing in the water behind Chris. The video has a lot to pick up on. Additionally, there's a bit of a story to it, where Chris starts by telling the campers to figure out Jason's deal, and later on the same campers are the people getting killed by Jason. It seems small, but it carries through the battle, and it seems like Jason's elimination is meant to resemble that conclusion of Friday the 13th films, but the fact that he's not really gone is immediately brought into play with that final visual I mentioned. Last note, I love how sad Jason looks on the dock of shame, it's just so funny. And all in all, this audio holds up solidly, but is serviced by an excellent and well thought out video that helps make this one of the best Gridlines. Number 3, Wario vs. Count Dracula. This might be the quintessential Gridline as of right now. It's over 2 years old, but every aspect represents Gridline at its finest, and you can tell it was a fun one for the team to make. I guess it's best to explain what makes each element stand out amongst other Gridlines. Start with the video. There were multiple editors who handled different verses. Chamario and Freshie Canal did the 2 Wario verses respectively, and while they have very different styles, both made use of a lot of fun transitions as different takes of Wario were saying different lines, and as a result, both verses are solid, and they both look great. One does not overshadow the other. Musiclide handles the Dracula editing, and it's another character that works very well in their style. Slower camera movements allow you to absorb the atmosphere of the more eerie side, and the transition from the square aspect ratio and the black and white into a 16:9 full color, it looks stellar. The costumes also come together quite nicely. Wario seems pretty challenging to pull off, but honestly, the big nose, it fits pretty well, and it doesn't look super unnatural, so they pull it off quite well. No complaints on how the battle looks. On to performances, there's a fun gimmick, with Tibbs and Freshie Canal playing both characters, but one doing body acting for one and voice acting for the other, and vice versa. For Wario, Tibbs pulls off a pretty good Wario voice. It's a lot closer impression-wise than I expected, with the ad-libs sounding particularly good. The way he says, "wah," during the one scheme part, it's pretty flawless, so the Wario performance stands above many others in Gridline. And for the body acting, Freshie Canal goes in. It's some of the best body acting in the series, where not a single moment looks dull. He has dynamic movements and opens his mouth wide for the lip syncing. Even when he isn't saying lines, there's memorable facial expressions, like the smile after talking about the steak line. Dracula is just as strong, with Freshie Canal doing a voice I haven't heard from him in a lot of the other monster roles, cause it's deep, but it's also smoother than things like Krampus, and it fits Dracula quite perfectly. The body acting from Tibbs matches this with some great expressions, like a sinister smile he pulls off many times throughout the battle. He has some dramatic movements like plugging his nose or flipping his cape, and they fit the mannerisms of the Dracula character quite well. Additionally, the fact that Freshie Canal and Mr. Tibbs met up for this meant that there were great fun interactions that not a whole lot of battles overall have, and that adds to the fact that this is a battle between 2 characters. Even though they're very different characters, it does feel like they really are there rapping against each other. Many rap battles can feel like 2 sides just saying stuff, this one's more natural. And adding on to the voices, the beat for this one is pretty unique. It's by a producer I had never heard of, but I find it miraculously fits the sound of both sides despite their differences. Freshie Canal added significant instruments like the organ on the Dracula side, and this instrumental is a top 3 for Gridline, definitely. It's catchy but intense, as the best rap battle beats should be. On to one final aspect, the lyrics. This battle has so many awesome lines that could easily be in the best DRBs. You have fun and simple jabs like, "I've seen vegetarians handle a steak better," and "it seems Elon Musk butchered you already." They work perfectly thanks to the power of Gridline. Then you have some more layered ones that show Gridline was upping their writing game as a whole at this point. Like the line, "No one wants to see your full moon Wario werewolf." It's very solid, with a decent diss, and great wordplay with multiple meanings like werewolf, WarioWare, very good. Admittedly, not every immature Wario joke is my thing. I think a lot of them are funny, but "you can't hypnotize these nuts to stay out of your face" is not really my cup of tea. That said, the battle packs in a ton of top-tier Gridline lines. Gridlines? They complement the battle, and all of the best aspects of Gridline are up tier in the production value, and that combines to make a near-perfect battle. Number 2, Richard Nixon vs. Gabe Newell. What a spectacular project. Tibbs mentioned this one was made pretty quickly, and it all came together very nicely in a short amount of time, so it was ready for April Fool's Day. And as far as April Fool's battles go, this is one of my favorites of all time. However, it is one of those projects that works well on the day, but it's also excellent if it had gone up on any other day of the year. That's not an easy thing to pull off. In the BTS, Tibbs mentioned how it rekindled some of his love for editing as he worked on it, and that's super nice to see, because I thoroughly enjoyed the other battles he edited after this one. And this one's very fun too. It's especially good because of the funny scene ideas such as the zombie hand transition, the part with the different politicians on the screen, and even just Gabe's intro with the portal. Additionally, the abstract backgrounds are very appealing, and I think they were a smart choice for this battle. Since it's sillier, I think a grand video with more elaborate scene backgrounds would have been a bit out of place. Another funny aspect of the video is the amount of cameos. There seem to be more than most, if not all, other Gridlines besides the one with all the campers, Jason, that had a lot. But you have John F. Kennedy, Bill Gates, and Gerald Ford all appearing. My favorite, though, is George McGovern, because he looks so shocked when Newell says was McGovern really worth spying on, but then he's grinning and nodding as Nixon starts rapping. It's a small, funny moment. This is all well and good, accompanied by a nice classic beat and solid performance from Tibbs' Gabe Newell. However, there are two aspects of this battle that rise above the rest of it, and frankly, the rest of Gridline's catalog. The first is the Nixon performance. Zossum completely disappears into the role for both voice and body acting. The costume has foam rubber to make Zossum's nose and jawline look more like Nixon. It's pretty seamless, and combine that with the black hair and eyebrows, this might be my favorite Gridline costume of all. Zossum's body acting here is also some of his best, with a standout moment being how he does his famous victory pose, but his face is just so expressive through the whole thing, even with that makeup, and he opens his mouth very wide so every syllable is very clear, and it feels like live recordings could be what were used in that mix. Nixon is the single best rapper in any Gridline, thanks to the excellent performance and the one other thing, the writing. What makes this battle stand out is that more than any other Gridline I've discussed so far, and more than any of them, frankly, this one has lines that sacrifice being traditional disses in favor of being true to the characters, which adds so much to the already excellent Nixon characterization. But on the Gabe Newell side first, you have really funny things like just wait for verse 3 being the closer of his second verse, in reference to him not making many threequels for his games, I assume anyway, I don't really know anything about him, and he doesn't get a third verse, so that's a hilarious way to end it. Then you have Nixon, who has truly insane lines that fit this bill. For example, if your son was that scary, you should have pulled out like I did Vietnam. There's a diss in there. I looked it up and it seems to reference the birth of Newell's first son being the inspiration for a Half-Life boss, because he found childbirth scary. But Nixon turns this into a crazy line where he flexes about pulling out of the Vietnam War. He's a sly face and does a sort of dance as it all happens. It's perfectly delivered, and it focuses on being laugh out loud as a moment for Nixon characterization, rather than a standard diss. And this is my favorite individual line in all of Gridline. I cackle every single time. But it doesn't stop there. I'll highlight a few others I've always liked. The line, "I'm overwhelming you with these flows, call me Watergate," has a pause at just the right moment, so when you've heard of Watergate, you know he's about to say, "Call me Watergate." And when he does, I can't help but chuckle every time. The line, "Your chance of beating Kennedy was lower than winning a knife," is a reference I don't know about, but it's easy to pick up on. I can assume there's some minigame or similar where you can win a knife, and it's very unlikely, and this is used to diss Nixon's past being defeated. That's great. And then there's one part of a Newell line where he says, "Cutting you short like your terms in office." It's a quick, snappy, and important reference to having a Nixon battle, and it helps complete a great rhyme scheme with "burn this novice," "terms in office," and "turn to profit." Last one. The line, "But instead you took the money and ran, Spiro Agnew," has another perfect pause before he says Spiro Agnew, but he looks right at the camera and does that sort of whispering motion as if it's an inside joke with the audience. The punchline doesn't necessarily diss Newell because the first part of the line already did that, but it shows another great Nixon moment with him calling out someone he had history with. And Tibbs said the writing process was quick for this one, so I'm very impressed that all these all-time legendary lines were crafted in such a short period. Having the best rapper and best lyrics in the whole series, this definitely earned a top 2 spot, but like Nixon himself, it's a runner-up. Number 1, Joe Biden vs. Sandman. Here we are, my favorite Gridline. And after all the praise I said about the last 6 or so battles, it may seem weird this one's at the top, because at first glance, it doesn't follow that standard Gridline formula. Instead of silly individual lines with that ERB atmosphere, this establishes a very distinct atmosphere with a focus on catchy writing that fits with the vibe. In this regard, it's similar to how other battles stray away from the classic Gridline like Babadook. However, everything about this vibe works for me. Because the connection is sleeping, the calm and soothing audio was a great choice, and every aspect of the audio is near perfect as a result. The beat by Danson is so pretty, and I would call it my favorite of all the Gridline beats. It sounds like it could play in a music box or in the background of a high school classroom, because it's such a pleasant sound, but it still miraculously fits in this battle. Then there's performances. I find that Zoltan does not do a flawless impression of our presidents, but the voice he does is one of the more common rap battle voices for Joe Biden, including what ERB did, and this is definitely the best of that kind of voice. Similarly, the quiet and whispery feel of it fits with this battle more than a "would you shut up, man" kind of voice would. For Sandman, Commander Jacob does a very good job voicing this really tired, bored guy. Who would have thought? And his calm performance is another aspect that fits into the audio very nicely. Gridline successfully establishes a battle of a very unique style, and this carries over to the writing. Battles like Nixon and Wario have lots of punches that stick with me, and while those have my favorite lines in the catalog, this has my favorite writing. The whole battle flows so beautifully, and frankly, has some of the best flow in any rap battle from my perspective. It's not fast, but it doesn't need to be. Right from, why is it that Joe Biden's the first in this family that's forced into battling this fantasy, it's a tragedy, but actually, and so on. It all sounds so perfect, with the quiet deliveries making it seem even smoother. There's not a single moment that feels out of place, and it works musically more than most battles out there. I think the writing style of Nixon vs. Newell would not have worked with this audio, because those individual punches would undermine the calmness. That said, there's still great characterization pulled off here. With Biden, like when he says two lines just kind of talking about Trump being bad and how he beat him, that's a great kind of Nixon type moment. And during that section, there's a subtle audience uproar that's loud enough to notice, but not so loud it distracts. It's a phenomenal segment. One other part I'd love to highlight is in Sandman's first verse. He has some strong punches that fit nicely in the audio, and my favorite is when he's rhyming words that end with essence, and it culminates in him saying, "with them rubbing, perusing, drooling over the adolescence," as they come back to Biden calling him creepy, while keeping the incredible AABA scheme that you don't see a whole lot in battles but is pulled off great here. But it doesn't stop there. He says the word adolescence, and at the same time you hear, "I'ma need you to kill the hypocrisy," with the word kill happening right as the beat kicks in again. If he didn't say the "I need you to" part, it would have sounded like this. "With them rubbing, perusing, drooling over the adolescence. Kill the hypocrisy," with a weird pause. The overlap is a brilliant addition, and the smartest use of overlap I've heard in any battle, period. And the scheme after "kill the hypocrisy, rampant in your democracy, stop saying what you're gonna do and fight for what you're promising." It's great. Those lines are awesome. They're blunt but effective with a beautiful multi-syllable rhyme. Everything about the writing and audio comes together. I could talk about the video and other things for this one, but I don't need to. It's not what makes the battle special. It certainly fits just as well with the vibe, but it's the impressive writing and unique vibe the team successfully pulled off that make this the best Gridline for me. It proves that Gridline does not have to stick by their established formula, even though I was dissing some of the ones that did stray from it, but they can still make excellent battles. Even though I was hard on some newer things, I'm glad they tried those new things. And whether the next Gridline feels like a classic one, or tries something really different, I'm super excited to see them expand their already very impressive catalog. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment down below your list of Gridlines, and give any thoughts you had on this ranking down below. I'd love to engage. Subscribe for more content. I'll see you next time.